I thought I knew what betrayal looked like, until I saw my wife slip her panties into another man's pocket right in front of me. But instead of storming over or screaming, I decided to let them dig their own graves. By the time they realized I wasn't on that business trip, their lives were already in flames. Ethan Taylor hadn't planned to attend the gala that night. His wife, Sophia, insisted it was important for appearances. She claimed her boss expected everyone to show up, and she didn't want to look ungrateful. That was the word she'd used, ungrateful. Ethan almost laughed when he thought about it later. Gratitude was the last thing Sophia cared about. They arrived separately. Sophia said she'd be meeting some colleagues beforehand for dinner, and Ethan had no reason to question her, at least not until recently. Over the past few months, small details had started to stand out. She'd begun to guard her phone like it contained national secrets. She was always working late. Once, Ethan had surprised her at her office, and she'd looked genuinely startled, as if seeing her own husband in the doorway was an inconvenience she hadn't anticipated. But even then, he didn't suspect how bold she'd become. He thought maybe she was texting an old flame or flirting for attention. He didn't think she would humiliate him so publicly. That night, the event took place in a downtown Chicago ballroom rented by Sophia's company. Ethan arrived early, unsure what he was looking for. Part of him hoped he'd prove himself paranoid. But as he stepped into the crowd and scanned the dance floor, he realized he didn't feel nervous. He felt strangely calm, as if something inevitable was about to unfold, and all he had to do was watch. He spotted Sophia almost immediately. She was dancing with Daniel Porter, one of Ethan's colleagues from the finance department. Daniel was the type who made sure everyone knew how many connections he had. He'd been in Ethan and Sophia's home more than once. Dinners, barbecues, holiday parties. Ethan even remembered Daniel offering to help install a new deck out back, though he never followed through. That was Daniel, always saying the right things, never meaning any of it. At first, Ethan forced himself to believe they were simply being friendly. He tried to look away, but his eyes kept drifting back. The music was soft, the room filled with polite laughter. Yet Ethan's focus narrowed to the two of them moving in slow circles. Sophia rested her hand on Daniel's shoulder, leaning close to say something he couldn't hear. Daniel laughed. Too loud, too comfortable. Then it happened. A small motion, quick enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. Sophia's hand slid from Daniel's chest to his side. She slipped something into the pocket of his suit jacket. For a moment, Ethan thought it might be a note. But when Daniel reached in to check, he pulled out a glimpse of delicate fabric, pale, lacy, unmistakable. Ethan's stomach tightened, but he didn't look away. He watched as Daniel folded the fabric back into his pocket with a crooked smile. Sophia tilted her head, her lips brushing Daniel's ear. Even from across the room, Ethan could read the shape of her words. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "my husband's leaving town. You can try them on me." Ethan didn't react. He didn't gasp or storm over. He felt no impulse to confront them. What settled inside him wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity, cold and absolute. In that moment, any lingering doubt vanished. Sophia wasn't hiding a mistake she regretted. She was reveling in her own recklessness. He turned away before either of them noticed him. He moved through the crowd unnoticed, past the catering staff and the corporate executives trying to impress each other with forced conversation. When he stepped into the hallway, he exhaled slowly. His pulse had quickened, but not from panic. This was something cleaner, something simpler, the certainty that he would never allow himself to be humiliated again. Outside, the July air was still and heavy. Ethan walked to his car without glancing back at the building. He unlocked the door and sat behind the wheel, letting the silence settle around him. He didn't start the engine right away. He didn't call anyone. He simply sat there, replaying what he'd seen. He thought about the years he'd spent trusting Sophia, the times he'd defended her to friends who whispered that she was restless, that she wanted more than he could give. He thought about how often she'd looked him in the eye and told him she loved him, how easily she'd asked for understanding when she worked late or traveled for conferences. And then he thought about Daniel, about every dinner they'd shared, every conversation in which Daniel had called him a friend. It struck Ethan as almost absurd. Daniel had walked into his home, shaken his hand, and laughed with him over beers, only to turn around and help himself to the one thing that should have been off-limits. Ethan started the car and pulled out of the lot, driving through the city without a clear destination. He needed time to think. Part of him wondered if he should feel devastated. Maybe he would later, but right now he felt unburdened. There was no guessing anymore, no need to wonder if he was imagining things. Sophia had made her choice. All he had to do was decide what to do with the truth. He drove until the streets grew quiet and the last of the city lights faded behind him. He parked near a closed coffee shop and opened the Notes app on his phone. He began typing out everything he'd seen. Every detail, every word. If he ever doubted himself, he'd have a record. When he finished, he closed his eyes and sat still, breathing slowly until the last traces of adrenaline ebbed. He realized he felt almost calm. What came next would require patience, but he could be patient. Sophia believed she was clever. She thought she'd planned everything perfectly. She had no idea Ethan was already a step ahead. By the time the sun rose, he knew exactly how he would dismantle the life she'd built on deception. Ethan returned home long after midnight. The house was dark, silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. He stood in the entryway, listening, half expecting Sophia to appear and ask why he'd stayed out so late. But she didn't. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. He moved quietly through the rooms, checking each space with a sense of detachment, as if he were a guest in someone else's life. Nothing looked out of place, but everything felt different. He noticed the framed photos on the bookshelf, the ones that showed the two of them smiling on vacation or celebrating holidays. He realized he couldn't remember when those smiles had been real. In their bedroom, Sophia lay turned away from the door, her breathing steady and even. Ethan studied her for a moment. If he woke her now and demanded the truth, she would deny it. She would probably cry, insist it was nothing, blame stress or alcohol. He knew every excuse she would reach for, and none of it mattered. He didn't need her confession. He had proof. He set his phone on the dresser and slipped out of the room without a word. Downstairs, he poured a glass of water he didn't drink. His mind was already moving beyond the shock of betrayal, focusing on the steps ahead. If Sophia wanted to pretend he was leaving town in the morning, he would let her believe it. He stayed up until dawn making preparations. He charged the backup cameras he'd purchased months earlier during a home renovation project. At the time, he'd thought about installing them as a security upgrade. Now they had another purpose. By the time the sun came up, he'd decided exactly where they would go. At 7, he heard Sophia's footsteps overhead. She came down dressed for work, hair pulled back in a way she thought made her look professional. She paused in the kitchen doorway when she saw him sitting there, still in the clothes he'd worn to the gala. "You're up early," she said, her voice light. "Couldn't sleep?" He smiled, careful to keep it neutral. "Yeah, just thinking about the trip." Her gaze flickered, but she didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she crossed the room and kissed him on the cheek. The gesture made his skin crawl, but he didn't flinch. "Drive safe," she said. "Call me when you get there." He nodded. "Sure." After she left, Ethan waited another hour to be certain she was gone. Then he got to work. He placed one camera in the living room, aimed at the front door and the couch. Another went in the hallway outside their bedroom. He installed a third above the back entrance. All of them fed directly to an app on his phone and laptop. He tested the feed to confirm everything was recording in real time. Next, he packed a suitcase with just enough clothing to make it look convincing. He set it by the front door. When Sophia returned home that night, she would see it waiting and think he was still planning to leave early. That was the idea, let her feel safe. He spent the rest of the day reviewing his plan. He told his manager at work he needed a few days off. No one asked questions. Ethan had a reputation for being reliable. By evening, he had everything he needed. At dawn, he carried the suitcase out to the car and loaded it into the trunk. He came back inside, walked upstairs, and found Sophia in the bathroom finishing her makeup. She smiled at him in the mirror. "Big day," she said. "Yeah," he replied. Long drive. He stepped closer, kissed her on the temple, and tried not to think about what she'd whispered to Daniel. Her eyes met his in the mirror, and for a second, he wondered if she could tell something had changed. But she said nothing. Downstairs, he paused in the doorway one last time. He looked at the place he'd called home for almost a decade. Every memory felt like it belonged to someone else. Sophia came down to see him off. She hugged him tightly, resting her head on his chest. He kept his arms loose around her, counting the seconds until it was over. "Text me when you're on the road," she said softly. "I will." He walked out without looking back. He drove 4 blocks and turned into a vacant lot behind an abandoned grocery store. He parked in the corner, out of sight, and switched on the laptop balanced on the passenger seat. The camera feeds popped up in 4 clear windows. He adjusted the angle of one remotely, making sure he could see the entire living room. He waited. An hour passed, then another. The street outside was quiet. He checked the time again, his patience steady. If Sophia was going to invite Daniel over, she wouldn't waste the whole day pretending to work. She was too eager for that. At exactly 11:38 a.m., a motion alert flashed on his screen. Ethan's pulse kicked up, but he didn't move. The front door swung open. Sophia appeared, wearing a robe he recognized. One she only wore when she thought she was alone. She moved to the living room, glanced around, and smoothed her hair. 2 minutes later, Daniel arrived. He didn't even knock, just walked in with a casual confidence that made Ethan's jaw tighten. Sophia laughed, low and intimate, and pulled him inside by the hand. They embraced in the doorway. She said something he couldn't hear. Daniel leaned down to kiss her. Ethan watched without a flicker of expression. They moved toward the couch, oblivious to the lens watching every step. Daniel dropped his jacket on the armrest. Sophia straddled his lap. Ethan zoomed in, adjusting the focus so there would be no question later about who was in the video. He muted the sound and sat back, studying the feed like a technician analyzing data. He didn't need to watch every second. The point wasn't to torment himself with details. The point was to document everything, to build a record so complete that neither of them could deny it. After an hour, they disappeared into the bedroom. Ethan noted the timestamp. He closed the laptop, set it aside, and rested his head against the seat. He felt no urge to confront them in person. The drama of a face-to-face explosion didn't appeal to him. It was too easy to dismiss anger as jealousy. He wanted something quieter, more permanent. He knew what Sophia expected. She thought he would drive away and leave her to her affair. She thought he'd come home in a week, maybe suspect something, but never find out for sure. That was her mistake. She underestimated how much he noticed, and how long he was willing to wait for the truth to reveal itself. As the afternoon passed, Ethan checked the feeds occasionally. He saw them emerge, dressed again, laughing as they cleaned up. He watched Sophia walk Daniel to the door and kiss him goodbye like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. When the house was empty again, Ethan finally let himself exhale. He didn't feel vindicated or triumphant, just resolved. The first step was complete. Now it was time to decide how to use what he'd gathered. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He spent the dark hours reviewing the footage again to be certain every detail was captured. Each timestamp lined up perfectly. Sophia's arrival home before lunch, Daniel's entrance minutes later, their embrace, the hours they spent together without a hint of caution. He saved copies of the video in 3 different secure locations, 2 encrypted cloud drives and 1 external hard drive hidden in the spare tire compartment of his trunk. He knew how these situations could spiral into denial and accusations. He wanted to be ready. At dawn, he drove to a small coffee shop he knew Sophia rarely visited. He needed to think about the next step carefully. Confrontation was tempting but would accomplish nothing lasting. He wanted consequences, not just an argument. He thought about Sophia's job. Her company prided itself on being a respectable, family-oriented brand. Her position in the marketing department wasn't high level, but she often bragged that her reputation there was spotless. She worked hard to maintain the image of the dependable professional. Ethan knew exactly how much that mattered to her. and how fast it could be dismantled. By mid-morning, he had decided. He called Sophia's office, asking for the human resources manager. The receptionist sounded hesitant when she asked for his name. Ethan gave it calmly. When the line transferred, he took a breath to steady himself. "Mr. Davis," he began. "I'm calling because I have information your department needs to see. It concerns Sophia Taylor." There was a short pause. "Is she in some kind of trouble?" Ethan kept his voice measured. "I think you should look at the evidence before you decide." He arranged to deliver a flash drive in person. He knew showing up unannounced would make it impossible to ignore. Before he left, he reviewed the video one more time, confirming every frame was clear. Then he copied the footage onto a clean drive, labeled simply with the date. He arrived at the corporate office building just before lunch, when the front desk would be busiest. He didn't want Sophia to see him yet, but he wanted her coworkers to remember he'd been there. He stepped into the lobby and approached the receptionist. "I have an appointment with HR," he said. The woman glanced at his name, then nodded and picked up the phone. Within minutes, a man in a navy blazer appeared. He looked wary as he extended his hand. "I'm Greg Davis. You called about Sophia?" "Yes." Ethan shook his hand. "I'd prefer to discuss this in private." They moved to a small conference room off the main corridor. The HR manager closed the door behind them and gestured for Ethan to sit. Ethan set the flash drive on the table between them. "I'm not here to cause unnecessary damage, but you should see what's on this before you make any decisions." Greg hesitated. "Can you give me some context?" "My wife has been using your office hours to carry on an affair," Ethan said, his voice level. "The footage shows her returning home during work hours and spending several hours with another man. I have records of the times and they match your company schedule." Greg swallowed hard. "This is serious." "It is," Ethan agreed. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it. Watch the video." Greg plugged the drive into his laptop. The file opened to a still image of Sophia and Daniel embracing in the living room. Greg watched in silence, occasionally glancing at Ethan to see if he was bluffing. When the video ended, he closed the laptop slowly. "I'm going to need a copy of this," he said. "I've already prepared one," Ethan replied, handing over a second drive. Greg cleared his throat. "This is grounds for immediate termination. We'll have to conduct a formal review, but I don't think there will be much debate." Ethan stood. "That's your call. I only came here because she left me no other option." Greg followed him to the door. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." Ethan didn't answer. He walked out of the office and into the bright afternoon without looking back. The next item on his list was Daniel. Unlike Sophia, Daniel didn't work for a company that cared much about personal image, but he had other vulnerabilities. He liked to brag when he drank. A few months ago, during a neighborhood barbecue, Daniel had boasted about a side hustle that involved moving money through accounts that technically didn't belong to him. Ethan hadn't paid much attention at the time, dismissing it as another one of Daniel's exaggerations. Now, he wondered if it had been more than talk. He drove home and dug through his old text threads with Daniel. Sure enough, he found several messages hinting at creative bookkeeping. It was enough to raise suspicion, though probably not proof. But Ethan knew someone who could look into it. One of Ethan's college friends, Mark, worked in compliance at a bank. He called Mark that evening, explaining the situation without naming Daniel outright. He described the behavior, the transactions, the casual arrogance. Mark listened carefully. "Do you have any documentation?" "I have screenshots of texts and a few dates he mentioned. That's it so far." "Send them to me," Mark said. "If it checks out, I'll refer it to the proper channels." Ethan forwarded everything. Less than 12 hours later, Mark called back. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "These look like preliminary signs of fraud. If he really is moving funds between accounts that don't belong to him, he could be facing serious charges. I've passed this on to investigators." Ethan thanked him and ended the call. He knew it might take weeks or months for anything to happen, but he felt no rush. He'd set the process in motion. Whether Daniel was arrested tomorrow or next season didn't matter. It was coming. Late that night, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, his laptop open to the live camera feeds. The house looked exactly the same as it had the morning before. But everything had changed. Sophia didn't know she was hours away from losing the job she valued more than her marriage. Daniel didn't know his careless boasting had handed Ethan the weapon that might end his career. Ethan closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in his chair. The hardest part was over. He'd gathered the evidence. He'd set his plans in motion. Now he only needed to wait. In the quiet of the kitchen, he felt no regret. Sophia and Daniel had both made choices. All he had done was make sure those choices had consequences. The morning after Ethan's visit to Sophia's office, the first calls began. He was in his car parked outside a gym when his phone buzzed. It was Sophia. He let it ring. She called again 20 minutes later. He silenced it without listening. He knew exactly what had happened. Her company's HR team had reviewed the footage. They wouldn't have been able to ignore it even if they'd wanted to. Ethan pictured the meeting in his mind. Sophia sitting across from her manager, watching the evidence play on a laptop, forced to see herself exposed in ways she couldn't explain. By noon, she tried to call 6 times. On the 7th, she left a voicemail, her voice small and strained. Ethan, please call me. I don't know what you did, but they've suspended me. I need to talk to you. He deleted the message without replying. That afternoon, he went home. He knew she wouldn't return right away. She would be too embarrassed to face him without a plan. He used the time to gather the last few items he cared about. Some documents, a box of old photos, a few keepsakes from his father. Everything else could stay. He checked the camera feeds one final time and powered them down. He'd already copied all the recordings to his private storage. He no longer needed to watch in real time. Sophia finally came home after dark. She walked through the front door slowly, like she expected to find him waiting to confront her. When she realized the house was empty, she moved to the kitchen, set her bag on the table, and sank into a chair. He watched her from his parked car across the street. She stayed there for nearly an hour, motionless except to wipe her eyes. Finally, she pulled out her phone and called him again. Her voice shook when she left the next message. I don't know why you're doing this. They fired me today. They said it was conduct unbecoming of an employee, that I violated trust. Ethan, I'm sorry. Can we please talk? I don't want to lose everything. He let the message stand. 2 days later, Daniel's turn came. Ethan woke to a text from Mark. Morning. You'll want to see this. Attached was a link to a local news article. The headline was short and direct. Financial advisor arrested for fraud, embezzlement charges pending. The photo showed Daniel being led from his office in handcuffs. Ethan read the first paragraphs carefully. Daniel had been under investigation for months. Ethan's tips had accelerated the process, providing missing details the authorities needed to tie several fraudulent transfers together. The amount of money involved was significant. By evening, Daniel's name was all over the news. Ethan knew Sophia must have seen it. He wondered if she called him, but he'd blocked her number after the last voicemail. Later that night, a message arrived through social media instead. I don't know if you'll read this. I'm begging you, Ethan. I'm scared. Everything is falling apart. Please, just talk to me. He closed the message without replying. The following day, he received a call from an unknown number. He almost declined, but curiosity made him answer. Ethan Taylor? A woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Susan, Daniel Porter's wife. He felt a dull flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected her to reach out. I just wanted you to know, she continued, voice taut, that I've filed for divorce. I'm taking the kids and moving to my sister's. I'm not asking you for anything, but I thought you should hear it from me. He paused. Thank you for telling me. He deserves everything coming to him, she said, then hung up without another word. Ethan sat back in his chair, letting the reality of it settle. In less than a week, everything had unraveled for both of them. Sophia had lost her career. Daniel had lost his freedom and his family. That night, as he packed the last box from the house, his phone buzzed with another call from a number he didn't recognize. He knew who it would be. For a moment, he considered turning it off. But some part of him wanted to hear exactly how she would try to justify herself. He answered without speaking. "Ethan?" Sophia's voice cracked. "Please, I don't know where else to go. My mother won't let me stay with her. My friends won't answer. I don't have anywhere left." He stayed silent. "I'm sorry," she continued, words tumbling out in a rush. "I was stupid. I thought I wanted something exciting. I thought Daniel was someone better. But he wasn't. He was just—" She broke off, choking on her own breath. "Can you just come home so we can talk? Please. I don't care about the job. I don't care about anything but you." He finally spoke, his voice steady. "You care that you lost the life you liked. That's what this is about." "No," she whispered. "I care about you." He almost believed the desperation in her tone. Almost. But he remembered the way she had laughed with Daniel in the living room. The way she'd planned to use his absence as an opportunity to betray him. "I'm not coming back," he said. "Ethan, you made your choice," he continued, cutting her off. "Now you're living with it." Silence. Then the line disconnected. He let out a long breath, feeling something shift in his chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but finality. He knew there would be more attempts to reach him. He would ignore them all. As he carried the last box to the car, he thought about how simply it had ended. No shouting matches, no public scenes, just the quiet dismantling of everything Sophia and Daniel thought they controlled. It wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was the consequence of their choices, delivered without warning, without compromise. And as he drove away from the house they once shared, Ethan felt no urge to look back. Ethan settled into a temporary apartment across the river from downtown. It was smaller, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but it felt clean in a way his old house hadn't in years. No hidden agendas, no unspoken resentments, just space he controlled entirely. He spent the first week unpacking the essentials and organizing his paperwork. He closed their joint bank account and had his paycheck redirected to a new one. He called the utilities to transfer everything to Sophia's name. He didn't bother telling her. She'd find out when the bills started arriving. Sophia sent more messages, some pleading, some angry, some just confused. When she realized he had blocked her number, she tried email. He read exactly one message, where she claimed she'd been lost and overwhelmed. He didn't reply. There was no point. He already understood the truth. Sophia wasn't sorry she'd betrayed him. She was sorry she'd lost control over the outcome. His lawyer helped him prepare the divorce papers. Ethan kept the terms simple. No alimony, no drawn-out arguments over property. He'd already taken what he wanted. The rest could be her burden. The attorney asked if he wanted to include evidence of infidelity in the filing. Ethan declined. He didn't care if Sophia tried to protect her reputation at that point. The people who mattered already knew what she'd done. One evening, he got a call from Susan, Daniel's soon-to-be ex-wife. Her voice was calmer this time. She told him she had moved to Michigan to stay with her sister while she sorted out her divorce. She thanked him again, though she didn't say why she felt the need. Ethan suspected she was relieved someone else had confirmed she wasn't crazy to suspect Daniel for so long. After they hung up, Ethan thought about how quietly all of it had ended. There were no confrontations in front of an audience, no shouting in the street, just facts laid bare and decisions made in private. In the end, the fallout had been worse for Sophia and Daniel than any dramatic showdown could have been. A week after he filed for divorce, Ethan received an official notice that Sophia had lost her professional certification. Her former employer had filed a formal ethics complaint, citing her misuse of company time and resources. The career she'd worked so hard to build was over. She would have to start again from the bottom if anyone would hire her at all. Daniel, meanwhile, remained in custody. The charges against him had multiplied as investigators followed the trail of fraudulent transactions. He was facing years in prison, maybe more. Ethan felt no triumph, just a dull acceptance that this was the natural end for someone who believed he could steal without consequences. Ethan's colleagues at his own firm had heard rumors. A few reached out to check if he was okay. He told them the simplest version of the truth, that his marriage was ending, that he'd discovered things he couldn't overlook. Most people respected his privacy. A few tried to offer sympathy, but he didn't need it. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that he'd wasted so much time believing in an image that never existed. The woman he married had vanished long before he ever noticed. By the time he caught her, she was just a stranger wearing the memory of someone he used to love. He didn't regret exposing her or dismantling the life she'd built on lies. He regretted not trusting his instincts sooner. If he had, he might have spared himself months of confusion and self-doubt. One Friday evening, as the summer heat started to fade, Ethan sat on the small balcony of his apartment. He sipped iced tea and watched the city lights flicker on across the skyline. He thought about the question people like to ask when they heard stories like his. Was it worth it? He turned the words over in his mind. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction people imagined. He hadn't found some deep happiness in revenge. But it had been necessary. Necessary to protect his own dignity. Necessary to prove to himself that he wouldn't tolerate deceit, no matter how familiar or comfortable it seemed. He thought about Sophia's final voicemail, the way her voice had broken when she said she had nowhere to go. Once, that would have shattered him. He would have rushed home, desperate to fix everything. But listening to her now, he'd felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a clear understanding that he'd outgrown the version of himself who would have accepted her apology. He knew some people would say he'd gone too far, that he should have just walked away quietly. Maybe they were right, but Ethan couldn't pretend that silence would have been more moral. It wouldn't have been forgiveness, it would have been surrender. And he was done surrendering. In the following weeks, he signed the final divorce papers and mailed them to Sophia's temporary address. She never replied. He guessed she wouldn't. He'd left her with no illusions, no way to spin what happened as a misunderstanding. She knew she'd lost, not because he shouted her down, but because he'd refused to let her rewrite the story. When people asked why he didn't try to repair the marriage, he only said one thing. I didn't lose her. She lost me. It was the simplest truth he had. Months later, when the divorce was finalized, Ethan took a short trip to the coast. He walked the shoreline early one morning, feeling the cool sand under his feet. He didn't think about Sophia or Daniel. He didn't think about the cameras or the recordings or the meetings in corporate offices. He just let himself breathe. For the first time in years, he felt like he could start something new, something honest. He knew he hadn't been perfect. He'd stayed too long. He'd given too many chances. But in the end, he'd walked away on his own terms. And that was enough.